You are listening to Off the Shelf, a podcast by The Conference Board.
Hello, my name is John Metselaar, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Off the Shelf, a series which helps senior executives address challenges and stay informed about current issues ahead of market trends. You'll be leading and not trailing. This series is brought to you by the Conference Board. Today, I'll be sitting down with Bruce Vojak and Walter Herbst, authors of the very recently published No Excuses Innovation, Strategies for Small and Medium-Sized Mature Enterprises. Bruce and Walter, welcome, a warm welcome to this show. It's a real pleasure to have you here. And I thought, instead of me rattling off a CV, why don't you introduce yourselves briefly? I know both of you are good talkers. So, Bruce, you start with a B. You want to start?
Thanks, John. It's great to be here with you again on this podcast. My background is varied, as is Walter's. I have engineering education, but over time gradually morphed into the business side of things. Aside from positions in industry at, for example, Motorola earlier, and then the University of Illinois in the College of Engineering, I'm currently managing director of Breakthrough Innovation Advisors, and I work with small and medium-sized and large companies that are in mature industries and help them try to innovate.
That was short. I'm impressed, Bruce.
I'm trying to focus.
And so, for disclosure, Bruce and I have worked together already on a series of webcasts, actually, which is available on demand on the website of the Conference Board. Google his name and you'll find it, or mine. And we talk about serial innovators. And we're going to touch on that subject again briefly, I'm sure, in this podcast as well.
Very good.
Walter, how about you?
All right, it's going to be a little longer than Bruce's, I'm afraid. But varied background, certainly, although concentrated in the reality that I'm a designer first and always, trained as a product designer, built what became the largest independently owned firm in America with offices in Boston, Chicago, and Orange County, California. Was always bothered to a degree, if you will, by folks that I was trying to grow within the organization, but needed managerial background. So the first thing I decided to do was get an MBA for myself, and then started advancing the folks in my organization to that. And then ultimately wanted to do a PhD on that subject of management of design and development. But 25 years ago, I decided to jump ship and do that academically. So I started a brand new to the world program called the Management of Product Design and Development. And it was dedicated to mid-career folks that needed to manage the design and innovation arenas that they were playing in. About 15 years ago, I still wanted to stay in the industry. And so my son and I started a new design firm in Silicon Valley called Herbst Product. And so I've always kept my hand in that, and I still do.
Sounds like the two of you are a very promising combination to write a book together. So welcome again. Pleasure already. And let's dive into the subject matter of today, which is actually, let me ask you, the first thought, Bruce, when you told me you were going to write a book on innovation, I go, okay, another book on innovation. What angle is he going to take to make this a distinctive one? So that'd be my first question. How is this book different from the so many others that have been written about the subject?
Yeah, thanks for asking, John. Ours is intentionally targeting this small and medium-sized mature company. It's an audience, at least in the U.S. market, that's really rarely addressed in book form. They're companies that very often don't have the infrastructure or the people in place to really invest time and thought in innovation. And so as a result, what Walter and I both independently had found is that these companies are just at times just uncertain as to what to do, uncomfortable with the idea of innovation. And in many cases, they're just not yet bought into the idea of innovation. And so in addition to being a guidebook that targets this audience, we also start with a perspective that at least we've not seen in other innovation books. And that is, we start with assuming that the audience maybe has not yet bought into the idea of investing in innovation. So we begin in the very first chapter of addressing the question, why innovate? And we do so in financial terms. We really want to try to help them buy into the idea before we start telling them how to go about doing it.
Yeah, innovation is about value creation and value
Yes,
capturing, ultimately value generation, right?
yes.
So that sounds like a good priority in chapter one. Walter, anything to add?
Yeah. What I want to add to that is, uh, as an academic, I obviously had to buy into those books, if you will, that were written on the subject matter. And the more I dug into it, the more frustrated I became, because probably most all, I want to be careful about that, but I'm going to suggest most all, if not all, were not written by folks that had been practicing. They may have touched on it, they may have contributed, they may have had a little invention or something, but they never lived it. And for all my years of doing this, and it's a lot of years doing it, there's one heck of a major difference between doing it as I've done all my life and folks that think by studying it, they can start giving advice on how others should do it.
That's it, right? Were you? This was your point, or are you gonna continue? It felt like
The
something more
point
was.
was
You don't need
that,
to say anything more, but I thought is more coming. I didn't want to interrupt.
no, I think the point being that you asked one more book, but this is a book that's written from real doers, and it makes. I mean, as I was writing it, my sections of it, and looking at how Bruce was creating, it was obvious that we were bringing something that no one else had ever brought. They were more theoretical.
Yeah,
I
that's
really,
spot on.
yeah, I like the point. Actually, when I was listening to what you're saying earlier, I came back to my own experience. When I left P&G after 30 years of doing innovation, I was asked, "Do I want to do an interview on explaining a few things around innovation?" And I thought, sure, I've been doing it for 30 years. I found it hard to pass the message on to others. And so, indeed, stepping back, and I've been now teaching like you as well for 7 years, and now I can talk about it. Now I know what I was doing and can express it as well. So fascinating! You actually pulled these two, that combination of both of you together into this into
John,
this book. Yeah.
let me just pick up on what you said, because it's absolutely critical. And that is, if you're going to teach this, if you're going to write about it, you literally have to think about all of the success, all of the success avenues that you can now reduce to absolute written practice, if you will. And you're right. If you just ask the question, how are you so successful, or whatever, you really have to think about it. And the beauty, once you think about it, you can formulate it. And that's what this book also does. We have absolutely formulated methodology that's going to assure a dramatic increase in success.
So let us talk about that formulation in a second. But before that, what I've learned in my business writing training is always start with a who. Who are you? Who are you writing this for? Who have you formulated this for? Who is your primary audience?
Yeah, I might pick up on that. As I mentioned earlier, we are targeting an audience comprised of people in small and medium-sized mature enterprises. But I want to quickly add, before I dig into that a bit, is that this is a kind of guidebook that could help people in large companies, really anybody who's interested in learning how to, as Walter said just a moment ago, practice innovation. But our audience, four broad categories. You could say that it includes in one group owners, board members, CEOs, kind of the group that would be more looking forward, the strategic group, presidents, general managers and their leadership teams, those on the ground making things happen. And then within the company, broadly, there are those who are inclined toward innovation. And let's say those who are inclined towards optimizing the existing business, because they have to learn how to work together effectively. And so we really want all of these groups to understand what's necessary and what it takes and what it looks like when somebody's trying to change direction within the organization.
Okay, that's good. That's very clear. So you cover it's a broad audience,
Yes,
but I've also seen in the book that you have special sections that you dedicate to each of those audiences, which I thought was a
yes.
really nice touch. So
Thanks,
that
John.
allows you to capture a broader group, but be specific in the messages for each of the groups. That was pretty cool. In terms of, let's get into the formulation bit. I want to go and start off by looking at a quote. You have nice quotes at every chapter. I really like that.
Good.
And I want to start with the one from Andy Grove, from Intel, and he's known for the "only the paranoid survive" notion, right?
Yes,
But what I found interesting in that quote, and I never even internalized that the first part of it is even more powerful, because the full quote is, okay, according to your quote, success breeds complacency, complacency breeds failure. Only the paranoid survive. I found that to be a really, really
yes.
powerful message, and I think that's really one where that sort of sets you up, right, for delivery of the punch. So
It
say
sets it up
more.
for mature companies in particular. You know, you think about it; they've been through that startup and emerging and growth cycle. But you're absolutely right, John. They're at this point where they probably already should have. And Walter pointed this out clearly when he and I were wrestling with how to present this. Uh, they should have already been thinking about innovation a while back, and they weren't doing it. And it's that complacency that just opens them up for attack, if you will.
Walter.
But going back to Andy Grove, and certainly referencing all of the work that we've done over the years, and if you start reviewing those that are eminently successful, it's not just the pure paranoia, if you will. It's the
Mm-hmm.
reality that whatever you do, you darn well better be working on the next generation after that.
Yep.
So it comes down, I think Bruce was just talking about the complacency of it.
Yep.
But so Andy Grove's message is broader than just the paranoia component that he enunciates so well. It's the reality of method. You better be working on Gen 2 and you better be thinking about Gen 3 because sure as hell, Gen 1 is going to get knocked off.
Yeah, I always use in class. I use my quote: "The worst enemy of future success is current success."
Yes.
And then
Yes.
I introduced what you also did in your book, the S curve. Are you even asking yourself, where are you on your S curve? Right? Are you at the start phase? Are you at the mature phase, or are you at the end phase, where it's already overdue to go and explore your phase 2 and 3, as you just described, your generation 2 and 3, as you just described. So that's great. Now so it's about it not being complacent, right? It is about challenging. Look at your environment and make sure that where is the world going? This is where the puck is going, and not where the puck is, right?
Yes.
What's this guy's name?
Wayne Gretzky.
Gretzky. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's the other metaphor I think we can talk here. Now I want to stick with quotes for one more minute here, which is um, your second quote in your chapter. Your first chapter was maybe a bit less philosophical, but not
Earthy.
less
It's earthy. Yes.
dramatic. I've pissed away millions of dollars on an innovation project with zero results. An anonymous CEO of SMME. So some SMME, yes, CEOs or leaders, they are seeing that they need to go and reinvent themselves, but then they don't succeed,
Yes.
apparently.
And
Why?
and John, that's not a contrived quote. I actually heard that
I
years
believe you.
ago, and it's so memorable for me to have heard that because it kind of, in a very uh, deep way, conveys this person's frustration. And so, why are they concerned? I think people are concerned because they, in many cases, don't know what to do. I think there's this complacency we just spoke about. They've got some level of profitability and they invest so much on optimizing that business that it's just easier. But the problem is that it's deadly when they do that.
But I think John's John's query really is all about um, the frustration of having spent all that money and I
Yep.
didn't get any place. And we answer that, I think, really well in the book because we devote an entire chapter to methodology. And
Yep.
if you'll just follow the methodology, you're going to get there with great success. Look, Christensen from Harvard has done years and years and years of study on this subject. Unfortunately, Christensen has been quoted wrongly in saying that 90% of intros fail within a reasonably short period of time. The reality is his research actually shows 40%, which is staggering. You cannot have a 40% failure rate within your own organization for sure, let alone within a total economy, and think you're doing it right. Well, so what's the problem? And that's, we get into great depth on that. It's all about method. And when I said earlier, with a lot of accuracy, the people that have written these books on innovation do have written by what they believe is accurate observation, but they've never lived the experience. And in my case, having lived it for my entire life, they just miss on part of it. They miss on a major part of it, and we talk about that a lot. And I just look back into my own history and Herbst's product. Boy, we don't fail. That's a crazy thing to say. Our clients do not fail.
Ooh,
We
that's a
we
bold statement, Walter.
Yeah.
It's a
But it's
crazy statement to make, and I will tell you that we don't stray from our methodology.
Well, and I'd love to, and this is actually I'm so glad Walter brought this up because one of the things, Walter and I had worked together a bit before this book, but really, if you will, wrestling through each of us writing sections and then revising the other person's section, we came to realize a lot about our backgrounds and who we were as people and as innovators. And what struck me near the end, I'm almost embarrassed to say it took that long to realize that, but with Walter's background in the arts, and I asked him this directly. I said, Walter, have you spent much of your career trying to identify a methodology? And not to put words in your mouth, Walter, but I'd say your response was absolutely. And as an engineer who comes from a very, kind of process design background, I've spent much of my career in the Serial Innovator book that I co-authored with Abby Griffin and Ray Price is an example of this, trying to understand the people view of innovation. And so together, I think we've kind of struck, I don't even want to say a balance, but we've really emphasized this need, as Walter pointed out, for methodology, but also the need for the people who really know how to work with that methodology. It's not just a recipe, but it's the master chef who knows how to use the recipe. And so I found, and bear with me with this last point, I found that Walter would tell a story, and wonderful stories that he's included about Brewer Electric Manufacturing and Slice and Pattern and others. And yet he was kind of, I'd say, modest about it. He said, well, we've got this process, we've got this methodology. And I'd say, Walter, you and your son, you guys take this methodology and do, I hate to say do magic with it, but they really do. It's fascinating to see it.
What I wanted to challenge the one thing that one word that Walter said. Walter, you said it is just the process, and I think Bruce already contradicts that to some degree when he says not only the process, the people as well. And that's exactly how I talk in the book, right? So
Yep.
the process section is very central in the book. I mean, it's very elaborate. Your phase gate, open innovation, lean innovation, product and technology roadmaps, to several matrices that you go and give.
Yep.
So indeed, great handles for those for your target that you're talking to. So that's great. But then also you talk to people. I want to get to people in a second as well, because it's one of my passion areas. But I want to stick within the process a bit and take go out of it all, partly, and spend some time on design thinking, because you actually start by design thinking.
Yep.
And
Yes.
so I also and maybe you can touch on this emotional design, which I often believe is being overlooked. Can
You
you
bet.
speak a bit to that?
Yep. Okay. Let me start with design thinking. Um, the first time I ever heard the word was probably, I don't know, it was probably almost certainly 15 plus years ago. And my dean of the engineering school came up to me and he wanted me to explain design thinking because my program was housed in the McCormick School of Engineering campus of Northwestern University, and I was the only designer in this engineering school, and I was bringing in this design management thing. So he asked me, "Well, what's design thinking?" I was still active in my practice, HLB, Herbst & Bell, this large firm, and I had never heard I had never heard the word before. So I go back to the office and I asked all the lead designers if the word was just coming out. And what we decided it was, which it turned out to be accurate, is what we had practiced all of our lives
Yes.
and never thought about. We
Yes.
never, ever, ever thought about it. And 15 plus years ago, someone started doing research on design firms and they saw the basic methodology. And it comes down to this, John. When we're given an assignment, we readily admit, as opposed to Bruce, who's an engineer, he's very left brain. He read all the physics books. He studied hard. He knows all of that stuff. We readily admit as designers, we have no idea. I mean, we just say that. So you've come in here with this assignment, and half the time we don't know what you're talking about. And so we first have to understand what's the problem. And in trying to understand what the problem is, we then go out and do an inordinate amount of research. I mean, hanging out, looking, observing, doing, playing the role. But then what we do is totally opposite of what any engineer would do. Any engineer would come back to the studio, to the office, and just start calculating it out. Well, what are the stresses required? What is the material properties, blah, blah, blah. And you just go on and you just solve it. As designers, we just scratch around and we work for days and days and perhaps weeks looking at every opportunity. And when you do that, so that became what we now call design thinking. And if you're a left brainer, I will admit it's probably hard to do. If you're a right brainer, we've been doing that since we were kids. We're just always noodling around, sketching around, querying, questioning, wondering, and that's the basis of it all. And so once we have that as a basis, then we can start putting it into formats. Formats would include looking at 2x2 layouts, if you will. Where do we find white space? Where do we find an area that no one's playing in? And then we go to methodology as to constantly confirming the thoughts and ideas that we think are appropriate. Long answer, but
you also
that's
no, not that long. It's perfect, and you only missed out one word, which is you are bringing the consumer in.
Yes.
Well, that was my point. That we don't just here's what you're going to find, John, in every book, and I promised this to be accurate. Any book you pick up that anyone's written on innovation, they're going to immediately jump in and say, first you do research, and then you solve the problem, and then you produce blah, blah, blah. Really? Well, no wonder we have a failure rate the way we do. We go back into the market constantly. The ego of the designer, I have to submit, at least in my industry, is totally non-existent. No names are signed on any sketch, if you will. We just scratch and look and explore, bring that out back to the audience we're working with, modify, change as we need to, tighten it up, do some more work, go back again to those end users, ultimately work our way all the way into models, visual models, alpha models,
right?
And then go back again. We never release.
Yeah, we
until
really.
we know exactly how that market's going to respond.
It's remarkable how how the industries still talk about R&D, or talk about innovation when they really mean R&D.
Yeah.
I was at two large events in Germany and in Belgium just over the last 2 weeks, and large corporations, and there's everywhere the word innovation. You know what? It was the engineers talking. It was
Yes.
only about R&D. R&D, folks, is research and development. Innovation is where you convert knowledge and inspiration into new value.
Yes.
And that is R&D feeds innovation, but it's by no means innovation. We should not forget that. I love what you just said. I love the way you think about design thinking. I love the way you bring in emotional design into this. Bruce, you're keen to add, right? Or maybe correct.
I'm sorry. What was that?
You said yes a few times, or I
I'm
figured.
I'm cheering you on, John. I agree.
Okay.
So,
Actually, I should be showing you one because I'm the moderator. Sorry for that.
No,
So,
but you're
Yeah.
reflecting. I mean, I'd say you're accurately reflecting what's there, and
Well, I read the book.
yeah. Well, but you grasped it, and I have to say, I just loved working with Walter on this because it really. I'm a better contributor today because of this engagement. It really
Fantastic.
broadened my background.
That's
you
what
know?
team spirit,
Yeah.
teamwork, and partnership is all about, right? So,
Yeah.
so let
gentlemen,
us. Yeah, one
if
more
I
thing,
could
Walter.
just
Yeah.
jump for a second, because I don't want to give up on. You've mentioned one of our chapters, emotional design, a couple of times, and I didn't respond to it. But at the end of the day, I will absolutely, once again, here's Walter guaranteeing that the ultimate purchase is based on emotion. You better believe that's going to work for you, and it's going to be an extension of your personality. And that is the designer's full, total responsibility to get to that solution and to confirm it's appropriate.
I love your quote in on that chapter. I like the red one. That
That's
illustrates
true.
Yeah.
the point that you're making, right?
Yeah. Well,
Terrific.
I'd
Hey, I want to
even
move.
go ahead,
Yeah.
please, John.
No,
Go
no,
ahead.
please. No,
Well,
no,
I was
Bruce.
going to just add that even ideas like jobs to be done, that's often used as kind of a catchphrase for how to focus on what makes someone want to buy something. I said that's all enveloped within this emotional design. It's
Yeah,
really
of
the
course. Well
emotion that
said.
you're looking to get at.
That's
But
good. I
please,
like that.
please
Cool.
go ahead.
Very good. People, I want to move in. So as we said, it's about process, and that's at the center. But if you have a great process, but Sally and Harry are not motivated, then nobody will be
Yes.
tapping into the process, or they try to go and cut corners. So Bruce, I mean, you obviously, your Still Innovator book. You and I did 3 webcasts on this. It's a hot topic for you. Can you say a few words around what kind of characteristic do humans need to exhibit to be able to go and manage this process and create that value we're talking about repeatedly?
Thanks for asking that, John. When I started working more with small and medium-sized companies, I just kind of assumed or speculated, if you will. My working hypothesis was that there'd be a serial innovator within each company, and I see that at times. I see the model that Abby and Ray and I identified in large mature companies, but I also see other things going on. But at the end of the day, there's always someone, or maybe a combination of two people, that emerge as the ones who really have the insights that drive the organization. And I'd say even the cases where, and I'm going to use Walter's firm as an example, when Walter's firm gets brought in, at times, because they work with the CEO or they work with some other group, they're the people that come in. So they bring the process, but they're also the people that have these insights about how to move forward. And so what I've found is that it can be the CEO of a small company, it can be a pair of maybe 2 people, maybe 3 or so, but there's usually this person or a group of people that really exemplify this innovator. And the example that I like to use now, I'm going to build on your idea of quotes from the chapters. Um, Company I've worked with for probably about 15 years now, Midtronics, and in fact, I feature them in the concluding chapter of the book as a case study, if you will, of a company that just does it right. The very first time I met their founder and CEO, Steve McShane, at the end of a talk I gave on serial innovators, Steve came up to me and he said, we've got a guy like that, and his name is Kevin. And it's so I just had to smile because it's so succinctly summarized that there's somebody in that organization that can, as I like to say, collect the dots, connect the dots, move the organization forward, and it's just a natural. It's this master chef of innovation, if you will, um, not a cookie cutter process alone. So again, I love this idea when in working with Walter of you have the people, you have the methodology, you bring it all together, and quite honestly, and I don't want to leave this podcast without saying this. Quite honestly, this can be done with very reasonable cost and manageable risk. And that's something that is very often lost on people. And I'm going to go back, tie it to that other quote about pissing away $1 million or a few $1 million. It doesn't have to be that way. And Walter, I love the examples he used when we were working on it. He said it's a lot like playing poker. You make a little bet, and if the cards are good, you make a little bit bigger bet the second round. If your cards are bad, maybe you fold this time and you ante up the next hand. Uh, but it's always about trying to manage risk and cost as well, and that
Yeah.
is just not out there all the time.
It's a nice book, and there's a nice book on that as well, by the way. Peter Sims, Small Bets,
Yep.
which
Yes.
illustrates a few of those examples really nicely. I refer to that often in my class. So the humans, really. I mean, I know you know how you think around the humans from because we did the webcast. I mean,
Yes.
it is about it's about deep curiosity,
Yes.
right? Constant curiosity, asking that why. And so that you create this learning environment around you and push others with you as well. So we talk about process, we talk about design thinking, emotional design. Within that, we talk about people. Of course, there's a third element here, right? Which is you need to go and set a direction. You need to
Yes.
go where you're going. It wasn't a quote, but I loved your stats here. 97% of leaders say you need more strategic skills. 96% says we have no time for strategy thinking.
Yes, that's actually a quote. That is a
What was
quote
the quote as well? Okay, good.
because again, these are things that when you read these, you just say, I'm going to tuck this away because I'm going to use this
Yeah,
quote someday.
well, this is
And
great. I love this one. So say more about strategy. I mean, what role does that play?
Walter, you want to pick up on that relative to alignment, or do you want me to pick up on some? I'll start with a bit, and
Well,
go ahead, please,
no,
please.
I mean, John, you're well versed in OGSMT, objectives, goals, strategy, measurements, and tactics.
Oh yeah, 30 years.
But and you might start using some other words for that. But if you don't start out by understanding what is that basic, what is it what's the problem, and what's that objective, uh, and then the goal is something you can measure. So to me as a designer, and then of course it follows with strategy, but those are foremost in in methodology. I mean, I said it earlier, and that is from a strategic point of view. One of the most difficult things to do is just what is the problem? There's a great quote by Einstein, and he said, "If I have 24 hours to solve a problem, I take 23 to understand what the problem is." And he's absolutely right. That's why I keep going back to the reality of understanding the problem through intense research, observing, being a user, living the experience. And now you start understanding what the real issues
I
really
like that.
are.
That's well said. That's so well said. I always say I fall in love with the problem before we jump to solutions.
Yes.
And because we're so keen to jump to solutions, and that's where things go wrong. I also like, by the way, on your strategy chapter, I really loved how you demystified strategy. Everybody talks strategy, but very few people know what strategy is and
Yeah.
what it isn't. And so that's where your OGSM, your objective, goal, strategy, measures, and tactics are coming in so well. And here's another definition which I jotted down when I read the book last couple of days. A strategy ties a company's purpose, vision, objectives, goals to its day-to-day activities. That was brilliant. That is, everybody should be taking that quote and knowing that when they talk strategies.
Yeah.
Okay, we're already over time, but this is a fun conversation. We need to get gradually to closure, and maybe what I'll ask you is, it's not a webcast for an hour; it's a podcast of half an hour, and we're already
Yes.
35 minutes in.
Yes.
I want to each of you, and maybe Bruce. No, maybe let me start with Walter first. Now we go in reverse. What's the key message that you want to deliver to the audience about the book? And don't repeat what you said around what design thinking and process. But
The key, okay, the message is that the 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 cost of bringing a product to market can be exorbitant. I mean, by the time you go through, as we noted earlier, I've spent all of this money and I got nothing out of it. By the time you try to get something out in a brick and mortar or on the internet, it's an extensive amount of time and money. And my closing thought would be, if you simply follow the methodology that we've outlined in this book, your success ratio is going to just change dramatically. There's a way to do it. Do not let your ego get in the way. What we see so often is the aha moment from someone senior in management, and then everybody goes marching off uh, into the road to nowhere. Stop that. Look at methodology, and you're going to succeed.
good,
Great.
Bruce.
I'd say in a nutshell, if you want to survive and thrive, you have to ask yourself, how do I renew this company and industry? And so often we see people milking industries, and that is a strategy. We see people chasing price and costs down to the bottom, and that's a strategy. But quite honestly, the only way to survive and thrive is to ask how to renew the industry. And I think we show between us a large number of samples and examples and case stories about that.
And then maybe I can wrap that up
Please.
with the last quote, which I found to be very powerful. Doing that, what helps you in getting there is asking the two questions, which I found very profound, which is, how can we solve this problem better? And
Yeah.
don't stop there. But then once you've gotten into that, in terms of setting you up for thriving, you can then ask yourself the follow-up question is, what other problems can we solve
Yeah.
once we understand how to solve that first problem? I found that to be very powerful. Your book is a very tangible, actionable handle for all innovators. Frankly,
Yes.
I'm glad you targeted broadly, even though it's emphasizing the SMMEs. So thank you for writing it. I hope it's going to get a broad use and application. So thank you for that, and thank you for this amazing conversation. I loved our little pre-session we had last week, but this was obviously even much better. Walter and Bruce, thank you so much for your contribution to the Conference Board's podcast series. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
And to the audience, I hope you found some of this insightful. I hope you were able to jot down some of the quotes that were used for your own use as well, and obviously application in terms of applying, not only use in terms of passing them on, but even applying them into your actual work. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our off-the-shelf podcast series or explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at tcb.org/podcasts. Thank you very much. I hope to see or hear or talk to you in a next session. Walter, Bruce, session is closed. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye.
John.
Thank you. Bye.
This has been Off the Shelf, a podcast by the Conference Board.
Looking for additional business insights in this subject area and beyond this podcast, go to tcb.org and explore our Human Capital Centre. Uncover a large array of products hosted by the Conference Board in focus areas like diversity and inclusion, talent management, and many others. Products include peer-to-peer networking events, expert briefings, publications, data and analysis, webcasts, videos and blogs.